right now we have to get to our guest, who's been standing by patiently. Dr. Gerald Edelman is the author of Sugar Rehab. Dr. Edelman, thanks for joining us here on KGO. I have to ask you about this new film that's out, Fed Up, a film released in the U.S., predicts 95% of Americans will be overweight or obese in the next 2 decades unless something's done to tackle hidden sugars. We need to be worried about sugars, not fat content?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're already there. If you look around you, and of course in San Francisco, a lot of people stay in shape, but around the country, we're already overweight. Yeah, so I wrote this book called Sugar Rehab. My whole point in that book is that sugar is the problem in the United States society. We don't get enough exercise usually in many parts of the country. Whoa. And eating sugar, things that are filled with sugar, causes you to gain a lot of weight.
Yeah.
Well, these companies are dumping the sugar into these products. Like, I know a lot of people in your listening area, San Francisco, you go out, buy low-fat yogurt, and look at the sugars per serving in those low-fat yogurts, and you've got the equivalent of about 6 teaspoons, sometimes 10 teaspoons of sugar. That movie's on to something, and I totally agree.
Well, these are obviously hidden sugars. I tend to think I eat pretty healthy. Don't ask the people in the studio here with me, judging by my gut here. But I like to eat pretty healthy. Yeah. There has to be, I look at things like granola bars. You just mentioned yogurt. There has to be a lot of not only hidden sugars out there, but there has to be a lot of misleading food labels as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I know that in your market this may seem counterintuitive, but if it's packaged to look healthy, the chances are it's not. And
well, what do you mean by that? Yeah. Packaged to look healthy? They're just misleading us?
Right? Yeah, exactly. So that's our topic, because these things, they tout catchwords like whole grain and, high fiber and all that, low fat. But then when you look at the ingredients, because I'm teaching people in this book I wrote, look at the label for sugars.
Yeah.
That's what you need to focus on. If you look at the sugars per serving, it shouldn't have any more than about 2 grams per serving if you're going to consume it, honestly. And, that's about a half teaspoon of sugar. So these products that we're talking about that are packaged in, green and brown and made to look real pure and natural, sugars per serving usually is, like you said, 10 grams, sometimes up to 16 grams.
Yeah.
Heavy sugar.
Dr. Edelman's our guest, Dr. Gerald Edelman. He's the author of Sugar Rehab. The website is sugarrehabbook.com. Dr. Edelman, I want to get you to hold on through the break if I could, since I took callers
Sure.
Coming out of that break. I want you to give us a little advice on navigating our way through a grocery store, if you could. And I'd like to talk to you about that misconception now that we're not talking about fat anymore. We're actually talking about sugar. So if I could get you to hold on through the break, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
808810 is the number. Our guest is Dr. Gerald Edelman. He's the author of Sugar Rehab. We're talking hidden sugars. It's not fat. It's not fat that's making you fat. It's the hidden sugars. And Dr. Edelman, before we went to the break, I want you to kind of guide us through the grocery store, because you mentioned, I guess you said the healthier the label looks, the more sugar the food probably has in it. Is that right?
That's right. I figured out that the sugar was the culprit. So I went through the grocery store, and what I did with my book was I listed okay foods and not okay foods. So I did the work kind of for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And my guide in the grocery store is, if it's packaged, look at the sugars per serving. And if it's got more than 2 grams per serving, don't buy it.
Okay.
And so the way that works is, take, for example, low-fat yogurt. If you look at the sugars per serving, it's going to be about 10 grams per serving minimal, and that equates to about 6 teaspoons of sugar.
Wow.
So that would be an example of something you wouldn't want to buy.
We eat sugar to feel satisfied, right? Is it even possible to cut out dietary sugar and still feel satisfied?
Let me just try to change your perspective a little bit. So think about, like, if you're hungry in the morning and you happen to have a donut. Like, everybody's done that, right?
Yeah.
So you feed your body, which is your Lamborghini, with a donut, right? And what happens? Think about that experience, right? So what happens is, about an hour afterwards, maybe,
mm-hmm.
all of a sudden you're craving more.
Yeah.
So the way I look at it, Matt, is the sugars, the simple sugars in that donut, they cause your body's chemistry to change, and it feels pretty good for about an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds a little bit like morphine, right?
Yeah. It's a drug, yeah.
And then you pay the price unless you feed that craving. If you feed your body in the morning something with protein in it, right, or maybe some fat in it, you don't get that craving an hour or two afterwards. So you end up not overeating. So it's kind of a trick that's really exacerbated in modern society because of all these hidden sugars we're talking about. But I do want to make one statement: is if it's low fat, don't buy it. Mm-hmm. That's not where it's at. It's at the sugar level.
Are these fat-free? I'm curious if some of these fat-free and low-fat foods, are they adding sugar to make their foods taste better?
Yeah, they definitely are. And fat has some taste to it, and you take that out, you got to replace it. And sugar's just not good.
So I'm validated in eating just regular blue cheese dressing, right? And not going for the fat-free.
Right. You are validated. But
okay.
I will say, Matt, you have to make sure you're consistent.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where the book that I wrote, I'm trying to list it out for you so you can stay consistent.
Sure.
Yes.
So keep away from the fat-free, keep away from the low-fat labels, and keep an eye on the sugar.
Keep an eye on the sugar. That's the best thing. It works. It's simple. People will try to. You got to filter stuff out because you hear so much from different sources. But yeah, sugars. Look at the sugars per serving.
So I guess it's even misleading when you go to, maybe everybody knows you shouldn't drink a whole bottle of apple juice, but when you go through the juice aisle and it says 100% natural juice, that's not good for you either.
Yeah, right. That's a really good point. And so I know, like, your audience out there in San Francisco, everybody's into health, and probably a lot of people.
Not everybody. I was walking around this weekend.
Yeah, well, they'd like to think they are, right? They'd like to think they are. But my parents were like vegetarian, and I grew up with the perspective of eating a lot of macrobiotic kind of stuff. And but what I figured out is that actually turns out in our society, just because we're not spending all day working out and stuff, it turns out to be counterproductive. So you can't do that.
Yeah, a little bit of protein in the morning, huh?
Not a little bit, a lot.
And
what I'm teaching in my book is, if you stay on these lists that you and I are talking about, and you're real conscious about the sugars, both, intrinsic in the foods and also the hidden stuff we're talking about, if you're real conscious about that, don't count calories. That's not natural,
Yeah.
Human beings don't have to count.
Yeah.
You just have to make sure what you're eating isn't causing these spikes and valleys that we talked about with the sugar doing it,
Yeah. Dr. Gerald Edelman, author of Sugar Rehab. The book is sugarrehabbook.com. Dr. Edelman, thanks for your time. We appreciate it.
Enjoyed it, Matt. Thanks for having me on.